Which should you choose for Star Citizen, the 5080, 5070 Ti, or the 9070 XT? Now, I did say I wasn't going to test the 5070 Ti, but in the end, I decided I'll just blow all my money, and so here we are. And I'm pretty glad that I did, because for SC, these are really the only 3 cards on the market that are worth considering for 1440p and 4K at least. So it's good to have actual data so you can decide which one you want to buy. Now, the cost and the pricing of these GPUs is very interesting. Here in the UK, at least, the supply of the NVIDIA cards and the pricing of them might actually change your decision. So let's get into the testing and then look at the pricing. The test setup is in the description. We're going to start, as always, in Lorville. You can see here that at 1080p with the 9800 XUD, that's effectively become the bottleneck. These cards are all way too much, really, for 1080p, and so they all perform the same. At 1440p, exactly the same story, really. They are still being bottlenecked by the CPU/memory bandwidth scenario. Then at 4K, well, this is where we start to see what's really going on. And you can see that the 9070 XT is a decent chunk behind the 5070 Ti. They're kind of the ones that are really going up head to head here. They're pretty close in price, as we'll talk about in a moment. And so, yeah, maybe that would, you'd look at that and say, oh, well, the 9070 XT is just not powerful enough. But in reality, as we'll see now, everybody really should be turning on some sort of upscaling. So you're using TSR quality for the 9070 XT, and it takes it pretty close to being CPU bottlenecked at 77 FPS there. But the other two, the 5070 Ti and the 5080, are using DLSS quality, and they are a bit further ahead. But upscaling is pretty key to games these days, and as we've covered on this channel quite a lot over the last year or so, there is a significant difference in quality in Star Citizen itself with what we have right now. So we have CIG's own version, TSR, we have AMD's FSR, but only FSR, I think it's 2, and then we've got NVIDIA's DLSS, which, whilst the transformer model that we've tested on this channel now you can't get working, at least without some real fiddling around, the NVIDIA app is basically not allowing you to change that now for Star Citizen, even though it was originally whitelisted. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But even the old CNN model, which is what I've tested with here, is still significantly better looking than the version of FSR that we've got in game as of now. And like we've said before, for AMD's 9070 XT to really, it would take it a significant step forward if we could get the latest version of FSR, because all the testing you've seen on the internet, all the different people who've tested it, the newest version of FSR is great. It's just, it's not supported in every game. It has to be implemented in each game. So let's hope CIG, AMD can get themselves together and get that version of FSR in to Star Citizen pretty soon, because it does mean quite a lot for image quality for the 9070 XT. Let's move on to the Horizon roof. And we can see here that at 1440p, we won't bother with 1080p because we're just completely bottlenecked by the CPU and memory. But at 1440p, you can see that the 9070 XT is a bit behind, but these are all playable frame rates. Not much difference really between the 5080 and 5070 Ti in any of these tests, which is going to be interesting. I'm not really sure why they're quite so close. Maybe that's just Star Citizen being Star Citizen. At 4K, you can see again the 9070 XT has fallen a fair distance behind, but again, that's kind of what we're expecting. And then at 4K, when you've got upscaling on, like we said, this is probably what you would do, what most people should do. You can see that the 9070 XT is fairly playable, and this is with very high clouds on this testing. I thought I'd not do it with medium. I think most people with these cards are going to probably want to push the clouds a bit further. And then just for fun, we've used photo mode again, but just with the upscaling options here. And again, you can see that photo mode isn't really playable in any of these cards. And photo mode is basically the only real reason why you'd probably want to consider maybe a 5090. It's the only thing in Star Citizen that, as it stands, that's really, really demanding and really demands a better GPU than 5080. So if you were wanting to blow all your money, literally all your money, then the 5090 does make some sense for photo mode clouds. Before we get into all the pricing stuff, let's just finish off with quantum travel. Now, this is quite a pure test of the GPU because there's so little going on for the CPU to do whilst we're out in the middle of space, nothing happening, just traveling through quantum travel. So you can see at 1080p, we see the scaling of these cards pretty effectively. And again, they kind of fall as you'd expect. There is a jump between each one, as was reflected by the pricing of all these GPUs. At 1440p, we're still completely playable with all of these. I mean, maybe some people would say, oh, I want over 100 FPS in all scenarios. Well, that's not possible in Star Citizen anyway. So for my money, the 9070 XT is completely fine there at 1440p. And then at 4K, well, the 5080 is the only one that can maintain 60 FPS natively. But again, turn on some upscaling and all of them are above 60 FPS. So you might benefit. Maybe you'd probably be able to tell the difference between the upscaled version of the 9070 XT there and the other two. There is a fair more frames on offer from the NVIDIA cards, but yeah, you could definitely play the 9070 XT at 4K in that scenario. So without going into any of the pricing, which we'll do in a second, you could probably look at those numbers and say, well, the 9070 XT, like I said in the kind of the previous video about the 9070 XT, it's kind of not quite enough for 4K in my opinion. I don't think it's quite there. Even with the upscaling on, I think if you're going for 4K, you probably want to move up to one of the NVIDIA cards. But at 1440p, absolutely fine, completely smashing it, and should be a good option going forward. And again, we just must before we get into the pricing stuff, consider the fact that ray tracing performance is going to be better on the NVIDIA cards. And as we said, the upscaling options you've got at the moment are significantly better for the NVIDIA cards in Star Citizen, but we are hoping that over the next year or so, that will all change. But at this point right now, you have to say that there's two real plus points to the NVIDIA side. Let's get into the pricing. So here we're using overclockers because they seem to have more cards in stock. We're just using the UK pricing for this one because all the sorts of craziness in America, tariffs, let's just not, for you guys, you can have to just work it out. But for right now, nothing in the UK has really changed massively. So we're going to use this. So you can see here the 5080 cards, they're coming in, the ones that are in stock at least, are £1,000 effectively, which is £50 more than the MSRP. So that isn't too bad. And there are base models, the kind of reference model type ones, the lowest end models, they are in stock. And there are obviously more of the more expensive ones in stock. And then if you really want to blow all your money, you can go right down to the bottom. But they're not unavailable, which they were for quite a long time. So they were obviously released earlier this year, and really only now they're kind of readily available. The 5070 Ti, same really. This is kind of an MSRP card, this £729 version here. And so it's in stock and you can buy one. That makes a significant difference because when you come to the 9070 XT, well, there are some cards in stock, but none of these are anywhere near the MSRP that I bought my card for. So I bought mine for £569. And so the cheapest options, well, the cheapest one that you can buy is more than £100 more than that. And the cheapest one that you can pre-order is, £80 more. So there is an argument to say here that considering the performance difference that we've seen in the testing, that because these 9070 XT cards are so popular and they really are selling really, really well, their prices aren't dropping back down to MSRP. So there's no reason for AMD to do that. There's demand, so they just keep selling them at these prices. But for Star Citizen itself, there's an argument to say that it's not a great value proposition at this point in time. Again, these prices might change, but for my money, if you were faced with this £679 version of the 9070 XT versus that £729 version of the 5070 Ti, well, we've seen the performance is significantly better for the NVIDIA card. And obviously, again, all the upscaling stuff, ray tracing stuff, it's tricky. These cards from NVIDIA have been universally panned. They really aren't very good. The performance improvement compared to the last generation is not very impressive. But with the prices as they stand right now, at least in the UK, maybe it's different where you are, let me know in the comments, it's hard to say that the 9070 XT represents a good deal, if that makes any sense. Now, you may hate NVIDIA, a lot of people do, and so therefore you want to go with AMD, that's totally fine. But if you're just thinking what's the best card for Star Citizen in this sort of £700, £750 price range, well, I think the 9070 5070 XT isn't it. I think it's the 5070 Ti, and unless you have a real grudge against Nvidia, and there are issues, it's worth saying that the drivers have been, considering Nvidia normally that's one of their things, the drivers for the 50 series cards have been awful. Like, genuinely, there's been all sorts of issues reported. I've seen some flickering here and there. Things they're not very good drivers, and it's almost like a role reverse. AMD have gone from being the ones where their drivers are bad and the cards are not really worth buying. Well, it's almost flipped in the other direction. But even with all that said, at these prices, I would probably, if I was gaming at 1440p, I'd be very tempted at this price range to go with the 5070 Ti. And then the 5080, if you just wanted a bit extra for 4K, then I'd probably still go for that at 4K. And just to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the 5090, well, its MSRP in the UK should be this. It should be £1,900 effectively, but in reality, well, the cheapest that you can't actually buy, none of them are really in stock. There is one in stock, it's £3,000, but they're way overpriced. And also, like we've talked about in the past, for Star Citizen itself, you're so CPU memory bandwidth bottlenecked often that buying a 5090, you wouldn't really see much more performance in many cases than the 5080. It would just be a complete waste of time, especially when you've used some upscaling. But if you've got the money, I guess why not? You go for it if you want to. I'd love to know what you think about this, which one you choose for which resolution, and I'd love to know what the pricing is looking like in your area. For me, this is a weird scenario because universally, the AMD card, the 9070 XT, has been praised. It's flying off the shelves. I've seen stats like it's selling 10 times more than the Nvidia cards, but maybe because of that, the pricing of the Nvidia cards has come down to the point where they kind of look like maybe the better option. Maybe for Star Citizen specifically, other games might be different, but let me know what you think. It's a bit of a strange time, and this video could, in theory, be outdated if prices readjust for the AMD cards.